And we're live, and that was a little Semper Fidelis to welcome my special guest for this evening, Colonel Jason Fettig, director of the President's Own United States Marine Band and Marine Chamber Orchestra. Welcome, Jason.
Oh, it's so great to be here, Mimi. Great to see you.
Thank you. It's wonderful to see you. And I just, as people are coming in to join the Tea with Mimi live stream, just want to say it's really, I can't believe it's episode number 33. I started the show in the darkest days of the COVID pandemic in spring 2020, just playing some solo flute music through my phone and talking about it when we were not doing any live performances. And it just felt really great for me to be able to connect with people that way. And then even when we happily got back on stage and back on the road, it's been really fun using this software to be able to talk to my distinguished colleagues about music and chat with audiences. And yeah, we welcome comments and questions. So thanks for coming on. I know you're having, as usual, an incredibly busy period.
It is. It never stops. Year round, there's always something going on for the President's Own. There's no doubt.
Mm-hmm. Well, we're going to get to some of those activities and lots of great music examples in a few moments. But first, I'd like to officially introduce you, although I think you need no introduction to so many. But Jason Fettig joined the President's Own Marine Band in 1997 as clarinetist, and then in 2014 was appointed director, and has conducted all the presidential inaugurations in that time, along with many other ceremonial events, national and international tours, has commissioned nearly 36 new works, commissioned or led the premieres of, which is so impressive. Also spearheaded new and existing educational initiatives, including music in the schools, additional online educational initiatives that have reached over 100,000 students since COVID, especially, which is amazing. Special events have included performances for the 200th anniversary of the Star-Spangled Banner at Fort McHenry in Baltimore, Veterans Day with the Mormon Tabernacle Choir in Salt Lake City, NBC's Today Show, a PBS special, the David Letterman Show at the invitation of Michelle Obama, many appearances on NPR and Emmy. He has guest conducted at over 40 universities and colleges. And I guess if I continue the whole entire bio, that will be the show. It's really great to have you live today.
Oh, it's great to be here. And I'm a little embarrassed by all of that because, you know, it's as much the amazing work of my colleagues in the Marine Band as much as it's been me. And to have the opportunity to serve in this incredible musical organization and to have these resources and these invitations and these chances to go make music in these amazing places has been a real blessing.
Well, it's been a huge blessing and highlight of my career to know you, Jason, as a friend, and to make music with you for our exciting world premiere last year of Jotian's Flute Concerto Written for Me.
Yeah, it's an incredible piece. And the only thing more impressive than the piece is the way you play it, Mimi. I mean, that was unbelievable. And really one of the highlights of my musical career was listening to you bring that piece to life with not only just the technical virtuosity that you did, and Joe did not pull any punches for you in that work, but just the way you own that music. And I was so excited to premiere it. I thought our performance went really, really well, and the composer felt very happy about it, and we're going to revisit it as well. So I can't wait to work with you again on it.
Thank you. Me too. I'm almost speechless by that, because just to work with you and the extraordinary musicians of the Marine Chamber Orchestra, such a thrill. I think that was a bit of a teaser. We are going to share some of that piece with listeners. But first of all, welcome everybody back to Tea with Mimi. We're seeing your comments as you put them on YouTube and Facebook. So please don't hesitate to ask questions for Jason Fettig or comments. I see Victor and Rick. So glad to have you here. Also, let us know what you're drinking, if you happen to have a beverage or tea or something else. Jason, do you have something? Oh, what are you drinking tonight?
I do. In my Kurt Vonnegut Breakfast of Champions mug, I have some wonderful French roast coffee. I'm not doing tea tonight, but happy to have some coffee.
Yeah, this started in the afternoon, and now it's kind of in the evening, so you never know if it's going to be tea, coffee, something adult. But yeah, I love coffee at any time of day. And this is actually some Scottish breakfast tea.
Very nice.
Thanks. So I actually wanted to start with a classic band selection. You shared with me just this tremendous playlist that for tonight's show. So of course, wanted to play something by John Philip Sousa, and the march that you selected was "Nobles of the Mystic Shrine." So I thought we would put it on, but Jason, if you want to introduce it at all first, we can do that, and then we're going to listen and then talk some more.
Sure. Well, John Philip Sousa was the 17th director of the United States Marine Band. He had, or I have his job, I should say, many, many years later. And, it was during that time that Sousa really became world famous and really started to establish his career. He wrote over 130 marches, and so many of them are incredible little miniature masterpieces. This is one of my favorites. In fact, when I did a Sousa's top 10 video series during COVID, this ended up being my number one march and my favorite. It's got a little bit of an exotic flair because of its subject matter. It starts in the minor, which was not terribly common for Sousa's marches, and then it moves into the major. But every strain of this march is just delightful from beginning to end, and just a master march composer at the height of his craft.
Wow. Well, let's hear Sousa's Nobles of the Mystic Shrine. Bravo. It was
Thank you.
impossible to not smile and move and march in my seat.
Yeah. I feel the same way every time I hear the Marine Band play a Sousa march. Just it's so stylish and it's just incredible. What a joy.
Well, one thing I learned from you and from some of the commentary that you've done, especially in Digital Rehearsal Hall, a project we're going to share in a little bit, just Sousa's being influenced by dance music and that tradition, which you really hear in this march so much. I know he wrote it in 1922, but I guess this is in some ways like an earlier 19th century American and European influence in his marches that I didn't know about, and I think maybe is somewhat underlooked by most of us who just enjoy the marches. I'd love to know more about that for our listeners.
No, Sousa was definitely a product of his upbringing in the 19th century. I mean, really, he wanted to be an operetta composer more than anything else. He loved writing songs. And one of the things I've tried to bring out with my colleagues is the song-like nature of so many aspects of a Sousa march. All of the trios, almost all of them are really songs embedded in this dance or this military style. And he loved dances and he wrote a lot of incidental dances throughout his career. And so all of those influences made their way into his marches. In fact, Washington Post, the very famous march, became a very famous two-step in the late 19th century because it was so iconic and so evocative of a dance. And so it became to the point where everybody was calling two-steps Washington Posts because it was the most famous music used for the two-step. But that permeates Sousa's music, and he kept it through the end of his career. He kept that old world influence in his works, and I think that's why it was so popular at the time, and it spoke to people. And I think even today, even though it's kind of old-fashioned music, it still makes people joyful and still brings them to life.
Absolutely, but you bring so much nuance in these performances of Sousa with the song and dance elements and just dynamics and refinement and style. And that brings me to something I wanted to ask you about in terms of this great culture of the Marine Band performing Sousa and other traditional marches. Because I think personally, I got to play in some band growing up in Boston, but then went to Curtis Institute of Music when I was 12, and we had orchestra, really great training, but no band. And so that I didn't get as much band experience otherwise. But when I was at Curtis, and of course very young, and the first time I substituted in the Philadelphia Orchestra, there were some players who were very old. They had been there for and had played under Ormandy, often for many, many years. And so that Philadelphia sound tradition was still there, developing from 100 years of playing in the famously dry, but we love it, Academy of Music, and also having studied with some students of Marcel Tabouteau, the great oboist and principal oboe of the Philadelphia Orchestra. So there's that very strong Tabouteau wind playing school and tradition that I got to be part of through my training. But I'm thinking for the Marine Band, what are some of those kind of cultural styles, like in the articulation for Sousa, it's very special. What are some of those things that people learn coming in, let's say, or that you shape as director?
Well, I think your comments about the Philadelphia Orchestra in our country are very apropos because I think that's the closest orchestral parallel to what has happened, especially in the Marine Band over the last century, because there's this great pride in the way the Philadelphia Orchestra played. The string playing certainly was iconic, and also the wind playing, as you said, Tabito. And that was passed down from generation to generation of wind players and string players and music directors. And the Marine Band has been the same way. There has been this pride in how we play a march. And of course, we play all kinds of music, but marches has been a part of our heritage for so long. And when Sousa came on board and Sousa became such a famous and well-versed march composer, that kind of coalesced and became the nucleus of our identity as a march playing band. And of course, orchestras play marches too, but nobody plays marches like a band. That was what they were originally designed for. And so as far as the way that we play them, every note gets attention. You know, much like when you play Mozart or Haydn or Beethoven, you want to give every single note its attention. It has its own color, has its own shape, has its own dynamic. And we do the same thing with marches. These little 3-minute miniature symphonies is what I kind of think of them like. That we think about every nuance of phrase. We think about the contrast between strong military articulation and bounce and verve and the lyrical singing qualities of the march. And really in Sousa's marches, The beauty is in the contrast of articulation, the contrast of styles, the contrast of dynamics, and you need to maximize those qualities. And he performed them in that way, but never wrote it down. So what you have when you see the printed music is dynamics that were not exactly the way that he performed them. And so we have done a lot of research, and in our Complete Marches of John Philip Sousa collection that can be downloaded for free and listen, that's all edited in a way that is the way that the March King would have performed them, which is to maximize that drama and create that contrast.
That's amazing. So yeah, that's something I recently learned too, just the different sorts of editions or performance traditions of even what Sousa had. Is it true he sometimes didn't even conduct from a full score?
Yeah, I mean, there were very few full scores actually during Sousa's time. So, and he knew most of his marches by heart, of course. But he would a lot of times in the old editions, we're just conducting from a solo cornet part. We don't even have a condensed score. So you have to know the march and have studied the parts individually in order to know what's happening. The series that we did, we made full scores for every single one of his completed marches. So now you can actually see everything in these free downloadable editions. But it was, the music was kind of haphazardly handled back in the 19th century and early 20th century. It was not nearly as detailed as we have today.
Those things are just is sparking so many questions because, looking into 18th century music, for example, chamber music often existed only as full score, or then it was brought from Europe to the United States with no parts. Like I saw a Mozart Kegelstadt trio where everything was together, kind of for at-home use. So it's kind of really fascinating how you've reconstructed some of these marches. But I'm just curious, from a musicological standpoint, how do you reconstruct dynamics from Sousa performances if they were or were not recorded, or that sort of thing?
Yeah, so he did put some dynamics in his marches, but it wasn't a whole lot of variety. And so there are two ways that we've determined how the dynamics should be played. One is that people did document, his musicians did document what he typically did. So for instance, the first strain of the march is played forte both times traditionally. And then the second strain is typically played piano first time, and all the conical brass is out. So trombones and trumpets don't play their parts, and it's all woodwinds and it's played softly. But that's not in the parts. In the printed parts, it's just loud all the way through. Mm-hmm. And then the second time through, everybody comes back in and plays the same melody, but plays a completely different texture because of the dynamics and the way we articulate it. So that's one formula, is just knowing what Sousa did and how he altered his marches. The second thing is just musical instinct. I think a march that's played just this way all the way through, one color, one temperature, one kind of attitude, one character, has no life. And what Sousa's marches are just filled with life. The harmonies are so complex and interesting. The melodic shape, he was a brilliant melodist. He just knew how to write a compelling melody. And there are hundreds of them. Every march has about 4 melodies and they're all fantastic. So allowing the dynamics to follow that shape, allowing the accents and the kind of build and the agogic accents and the build to certain moments, it's so important to allow that to happen organically and not just do it all one flavor.
Well, you and the band are so locked in. Like I think of any music that has to have a rhythmic groove. My ensemble does a lot of Latin music, for example, and it has a special way of playing it. I, as a classical player, when I cross over, can sometimes be ahead of the beat and have to sink back into that groove. I would think that's part of the culture of this type of music too.
There is. I mean, marches rush, bands rush. That's the cliche, right? Bands rush. And so we work, even the Marine Band, one of the best professional bands in the world, we tend to kind of get a little ahead of ourselves. But when we sit back and we sit in that pocket, it just makes the march so special, because then you can pay that much more attention to those interesting moments and articulations. And the other thing in the percussion is so important in a Sousa march, because you could just have over and over and over again, and it would be pretty boring, and it would be a little bit kind of monotonous. But the way Sousa wrote and the way Sousa had his percussionists play, a lot of times he wanted a little bit of an afterbeat accent. So, and you can imagine, just like in Latin music, where you can bring those syncopations and those hemiolas to bear, in a Sousa march, if you put a little bit of an accent on the afterbeat, it changes the entire motor behind the music, and it actually changes the shape of the accompaniment and the shape of the melody if you do that. So if you listen to the Marine Band play marches, you'll hear a little bit of that nuance, just a small little change that can change the complexion of the entire strain.
Oh, That's amazing. I'm going to listen for that percussive detail when I listen more to the marches. And you mentioned a project you did during your tenure as director, which is re-recording the complete Sousa marches, available online. I think is that the With Scores project too?
It is. The scores to almost all of the marches. Yeah, up through the 1920s at this point.
That's amazing. Congratulations. What a
Thank
great
you.
resource. What a gift to everyone. Really.
It's been wonderful to hear the feedback from teachers and students and Sousa aficionados across the country who now have a chance to go not only listen to all these marches recorded by the same band in the same space. It's really a kind of an anthology that we were trying to create, a resource, but then also to be able to go look at all these full scores, to be able to analyze what was originally printed in Sousa's parts and what we perform as the Marine Band traditionally. So that has been really gratifying to know that people have loved it and are using it regularly.
Wow. Well, we're going to probably hear some contrasting music next with the Jotian flute concerto, but just want to acknowledge the lovely comments coming in. Tracy from Connecticut. Yes, you participate in some of my master classes. Great hearing from you. You're looking forward or hoping for Sousa Palooza again in Hartford. Yes. And some other really nice comments. And then, I'm so glad my musicologist friend Steve Fisher is here because he's talking about how his friends are reconstructing Sousa's orchestration of HMS Pinafore for an early
Really?
Oh,
Okay.
wow. I didn't know that he had one. That's really interesting stuff. Yeah.
Sousa was a huge Gilbert and Sullivan fan. He wanted to be the American Gilbert and Sullivan, one person, but he wanted to be the equivalent in America in his operettas.
Wow. Yeah, it doesn't seem like they're performed much.
No, a couple of them are. El Capitan has performed a fair amount, but he wrote, I think, 6 or 7 operettas, and only about 2 of them get regular play. The rest of them have fallen into obscurity, unfortunately.
It's too bad. I mean, operetta in general is not as famous as it should be right now, probably. But yeah. Let's hear some of Jotian's concerto. This is from the premiere, and it's really lovely that the entire video is out from the Marine Chamber Orchestra on the Marine Band YouTube page, so everyone can hear it all. And maybe we'll hear some music and then we'll talk more. So I'm going to, it might not be queued up, but I'm going to aim for the second movement.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, woo, indeed. That makes me very happy too.
I was remembering we talked after the performance that both of our hearts were racing, right? And after that movement.
And then we had to go on to the third movement, which is completely different, right?
Yes, and I can't wait for everyone to hear, well, the whole thing, of course. The Iris's first movement is also the longest movement of the piece and very special.
Mhm.
Joe was thinking of the colors of irises at first, and he was actually originally entitling the movement Lilacs, and I told him, well, irises are my favorite flower, and he changed the title, so it's very personal and
I
special.
didn't know that. That's the first time you told me that. That's so amazing.
Yeah. So it's really fun to relive that performance.
Yeah, it was fast, huh? We were cooking. It was
Yeah.
good.
Well, Joe did it to us. He had a very fast tempo marking.
I'm just glad when I hear that, I'm so glad that you're playing and I'm conducting because my part was much easier than yours. So that was good.
Well, you made my job as easy as could be, really, with that leadership and all the incredible orchestra member solos, because it's a little bit like a concerto for orchestra as well as
Yeah.
a huge flute concerto, but just really spotlighting different sections and soloists.
Mhm.
Yeah.
This is one of the, for your listeners, one of the greatest kept secrets I think we can talk about in America is the Marine Chamber Orchestra, because people think of the Marine Band, the President's Own, they think of a band, and that's where we started, of course. But there have been strings in the Marine Band for the last 200 years. Just people used to double on violin and clarinet, and there was always the capability to play string chamber music or with an orchestra. But we've had a full-time orchestra for 75 years now, and that's the ensemble that plays most frequently in the White House. And we get a chance to share it with the American public too in places like this.
That is amazing. Well, I know from going to some of your concerts, just the range of styles is really incredible that you do. I mean, this is one of, I guess, your 36 commissions and premieres. And in terms of the commitment to new music, I was wondering, when you assumed the role of director, did you have in mind a set of composers you wanted to commission, or was it more case by case, or was there sort of like an overarching range of styles you want to represent with your new music that you've contributed to the canon?
That's a great question, Mimi. And I think, of course, every music director, every conductor has their own general artistic sensibilities, and the kind of music that lights them up. And I think that, and that we think would be good to add to the repertoire. But I did not come into my tenure as director with a set of composers that I definitely wanted to commission. I had some composer friends that I had in mind that I thought would be good. In fact, my very first major commission was Jim Stevenson, who is a marvelous American composer, and he wrote us a symphony that we premiered in Chicago on my second year as director. But after that, I actually was just thrilled to start to meet composers, because when you conduct the Marine Band or another professional ensemble with a national profile, composers, of course, would love to have their music played. And so it was a joy to get people sending me their work and just to find out more about composers that I didn't know in addition to the ones I did. And so I would say half of my commissions have been from composers that I do know their work and know them. And the other half have been just discoveries, either through a consortium like this one was, or through other projects, or in the case of, for instance, a composer named Michael Gilbertson, who I met through Jim Stevenson. So once we worked together, Jim said, hey, you really should learn Michael's music. And I met Michael and I listened to his music. I thought, this is incredible. And I commissioned him. So that discovery and that kind of unexpected collaboration between ensemble and soloist and composer and conductor has been one of the great joys of my artistic life in the band.
Wow. Well, I'm just so grateful that you believed in this project and took it on as one of 7 commissioning consortium orchestras. And then what we're also so excited about is going to be recording it with you for one of your albums celebrating the 225th anniversary of the Marine Band. A band album and a chamber orchestra album with new works. Please tell everyone about that too, Jason.
Well, yeah. Well, I mean, it's just amazing to think about the fact that the Marine Band is 225 years old. Not only the oldest continuously active professional music organization in the country, but the fact that it's been embedded in the Marine Corps since 1798. And I always love to tell people just how special it is that music has been central to the Marine Corps for almost its entire existence and continuously. And then we also got our association with the presidency a few years later. So the Marine Corps came first, of course, and then the President's Own. But 225 years in the band and the orchestra have evolved so much during that time. And one of the things that we always pride ourselves on doing is celebrating American music. We've been celebrating it since the early 19th century, and the tunes Hail Columbia and all these old songs that were the popular tunes of the day, and the Marine Band played them, and we do it today. And we celebrate as many living artists and composers as we can. And so part of my project for this year to record for the celebration of the 225th anniversary was to try to celebrate music that has been written for the band, written for the orchestra, or arranged for these ensembles. And I didn't set out to do that, but when I started to collect all the music that I thought would be a great celebration for this milestone, it ended up being that these were the pieces that we have premiered. Many of them I have been a part of commissioning, and some have been written prior to my time as director. And I also thought it was a perfect opportunity to showcase the orchestra as well as the band, who doesn't get recorded quite as much as the band because they're often so busy at the White House. And it's a relatively newer ensemble compared to the band, which has been here since the beginning. And then the nucleus of this project was your concerto. It was our collaboration, which was so exciting to work with a musician of your caliber and a composer of Joe's caliber on a brand new piece, to have the opportunity to actually give the world premiere of it. It just felt like we needed to put this on tape so that it could be a part of this celebration of the artistic identity also of the President's Own.
Wow. Well, it's just really such a thrill to be in such august company with you, Jason, and the Marine Chamber Orchestra, and also other soloists and composers as part of the project. Our Dolce Suono ensemble, friend and clarinetist Ricardo Morales is part of the cycle as well. So it's just very special. It's like a little family of some of the
It
artists.
is, and it's funny how you find these connections when you meet new artists and you forge new friendships, and you realize how many of the same people we know and love and work with, and that makes that even more special when those emerge, those relationships.
Yes, and this incredible piece by Jotian has emerged from our longstanding friendship. We've performed together for a long time. The ensemble commissioned other works by him, and really getting to know him and his music. So it's really special. And I want to also thank some of our comments that we're getting. Oh yes, Ronnie Gordon, thanks for your comment. Mom, yeah, I think you do remember that Steve Fisher attended the premiere, so we perhaps have other listeners who were at that concert as well. Please say hi. Lee, Victor, Rick, Tracy, thanks for your comments on that. Yeah, can't wait for you to hear the whole piece if you haven't already. Let's stay with orchestra, because you shared with me this beautiful performance of Brahms' Haydn variations. I'd love to hear the beginning of that, and then we'll talk about that. Did you want to introduce that performance before we go to it, Jason?
Well, it's one of my bucket list pieces. You know, I conduct band a little bit more than I conduct orchestra, but I have had over the last 20 years many opportunities to work with the Marine Chamber Orchestra, and I've had a list of pieces that I want to make sure I get to before I retire. And I never got around to the Brahms Haydn variations, and it's one of those pieces that works equally well with a full symphony orchestra as it does with chamber orchestra. And so getting into it this last year was a real joy, and I had so much fun working with my colleagues on this masterpiece.
Oh, that's really lovely. I think I heard a band arrangement recording that you did as well.
I think there's a chamber winds version of it, yes. But I don't think I'd conducted that. So this was the first time that I had a chance to live with the whole piece.
Okay, I thought I saw it. Oh my God. Am I imagining just winds? That's really cool. Well, let me put some on. This is going to be just the beginning of this beautiful performance. There's no good place to stop. I really did not want to stop that beautiful performance.
He's a genius, isn't he? Just every note that Brahms wrote was perfect. Just
Yeah. And what
unbelievable.
you said about a bucket list piece for you that you wanted to conduct, there's something really special about this piece. Well, really about all Brahms, but there's the muscularity and the tenderness. Everything is coexisting. What is it for you that makes this piece so special?
I mean, I think Brahms, like Bach, just there's no wasted notes. Everything feels necessary. Even in that piece, the repeats feel necessary. You know, the fact that he has this, the form of it's perfect. The proportions are perfect. The order of the variations are perfect, just emotionally. And it's like, you know, I know Brahms revered Bach, of course, and revered Beethoven. And I think he shares that same sensibility of there's no fat, there's no waste. You know, I think of the Fourth Symphony with no introduction, like it just starts and it's perfect because you don't need any exposition. It just kind of happens. I think that's what speaks to me, in addition to it just being so expressive and so heartfelt and so singable, but in a very complex and interesting way, you know, and I love music like that.
That's amazing you said that because my dear friend, the late composer Stephen Stuckey, always advised composition students to do away with any throat clearing at the beginning of the piece. Just start with good material. So I think we can agree that Brahms knew how to do that.
Yeah, it's incredible. And as a clarinetist, of course, the Brahms clarinet music was some of my favorite. And that was really my introduction to Brahms was through the clarinet music. And then only later did I get more in tune with the symphonic music and the Requiem and all the amazing masterpieces that came from his pen.
Mhm. Well, what's it like for you? It's really neat, obviously, that you're a clarinetist conducting band and orchestra. And I saw one of the conductors you coached with was Osmo Vanska, one of the few fellow clarinet conductors, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, what is it like for you coming from winds, working with strings and winds? I mean, it's all music, right? We always have to
Yeah.
play with all of it, or in your case, conduct it all. But how do you kind of shift if you do have to from orchestra to bands?
Well, you know, it actually has been incredibly fruitful for me as a musician because to spend, you know, kind of equal time with strings and with winds, I bring my approach for each of those ensembles to the other ensemble. So I realized 10 or 15 years into my conducting that I was talking to the band with string terminology. I was like, can we play this articulation, you know, off the string? Can we play these pizzicato with that resonance that you would get? Can I get a longer bow, a more air, a more line through that? And I don't know if they like it or not, but that's the best way I could think to describe what I was looking for. And the physicality of string playing automatically has a musicianship to it that is very compelling. And I think helpful for wind players who are a little bit more static physically in their playing. And for the string players, because I make music through air and I think of music as a singing line and as a clarinet player, oftentimes when I felt like music was a little too angular or a little bit losing the line because of that technique, if you're doing a certain kind of bowing, if I wanted something that was more line, I would use the terminology and use the terminology of air and of singing. And I find myself thinking like a wind player when I'm working with strings. And so I've really enjoyed that crossover because I hate this idea that you're either an orchestra conductor or a band conductor. There are absolutely techniques that I use with an orchestra that I would not use physically with a band and vice versa. But 90% of the music making is the same. I mean, we're making music and it's just being sensitive to how that music is realized, I think is the only difference that needs to be
Mhm.
kind of factored into your conducting.
Wow. Well, the cross pollination makes so much sense. I mean, my teacher, Julius Baker, legendary flutist, was always saying, change the bow. So a string playing technique for do a phrase. And then when I collaborate with great string players, string quartets, they're kind of reminding themselves to breathe, right?
Right.
But it's actually funny because we as wind players, we try to breathe quietly. It's a big thing for us. We don't want to be heard breathing, even though thankfully we're humans, we're breathing. And then the string players are so nice, right? Taking some big sniffs there. And
But you hear that, you hear like Glenn Gould play on his recordings, or you hear Pablo Casals and you hear the breathing, and it's not distracting because it's so connected to the singing of the music that it actually enhances what's coming out of the instrument. And I always loved that and took such lessons from that. Don't be afraid to breathe into the music.
yeah, it's great. Yeah, that physicality part, I agree. It is also thrilling when you're there in person with that in the space. So yes,
Well,
we're
this was so compelling about your playing, Mimi, is you are a very physical player. And one of the reasons why it's so easy to collaborate with you is not only because what you do is brilliant, but it's so demonstrative, how you're feeling the phrase, how you're feeling the rhythmic energy. And as a conductor, you said earlier in our broadcast that it was easy to follow me. Well, it's easy to follow you. And that synergy is so critical. And it comes from the body, it comes from the breath, and just kind of, again, breathing and moving into the music in a way that feels organic and gets communicated to your colleagues when you're playing with them. And you know that's as such a brilliant chamber musician, it's what you do all the time. I'm usually with larger ensembles, and so getting people to feel free to do that is one of my challenges as a conductor, to free them up to move, to be more physical. I think is a really important aspect of music making with a large ensemble.
Well, thank you so much for that. And no, it's true that as a soloist, chamber musician, flutist, it's fine when I breathe with or move and physically with the music. But I know in orchestral settings, if you're principal flute, you can move a bit, but if you're second, you have to move less than the first. And so but what I'm always amazed when I see the Marine Band, that everyone is quite still making very dynamic music. It's really impressive. Like I would have to get used to that, like I think it'd be a challenge for.
It
Yeah.
surprises me sometimes because I'm a pretty dynamic conductor and I was a dynamic player too. And when the fact that they can do that and emote the way they do and play together and be relatively static in the band, I'm always shocked. I'm like, how are you doing this? How am I able to just let it happen? And it's so beautifully together and so intuitive.
Yeah.
So,
It's amazing.
I don't know, if it works, don't break it.
Absolutely. Oh, and one more nice comment. Oh, Steve Fisher is playing the Brahms Haydn Variations next month in a group that size. Yeah, it totally works. Have fun. Actually, I have such special memories of playing that piece with Otto Werner Müller as a Curtis student, and then also with Wolfgang Sawallisch. So,
oh wow,
from this great German tradition.
How were the interpretations? Were they different, or did they take a similar approach? Because there are different choices you could make in that piece.
I was trying to think about that even just recently, because I felt like there was something very unique in the way, not to generalize, but let's say these older German conductors from that tradition did Brahms and Beethoven and Strauss and in this kind of middle German repertoire, as they say. And I know one thing for Otto Werner Müller, which I'm so grateful that he instructed us with, was just absolute faithfulness to the score, to really understanding dynamics, especially in context, and also as markings in Brahms that convey a color. So a forte is never going to be crude. A mezzo forte is always going to have a level that's under the forte. It's very sculpted, very architectural, very elegant, I would say, but very much thinking about a certain sound quality. I learned so much from that approach.
Oh, I can only imagine. Yeah.
Which was really special. But we did have a question actually about advice for playing piccolo parts in Sousa marches. And I was going to actually ask you something a little similar to that. So yes, while we have the benefit of your expertise, do you have advice for?
Well, the first step is to check whether the part's in D flat or C. Very important. Most of them are in C, but a couple in D flat. Well, I'm spoiled by our piccolo players in the President's Own because they play with such taste and grace and great pitch, but always this effervescent kind of quality. I think in the piccolo playing in a Sousa march, it's about the articulation. It's about the kind of keeping there to be life and kind of champagne bubbles in the articulation, so that it always rides above. A lot of times the piccolo parts are simply just an octave higher than the melodic material. It's this color on top. And we actually drop out the piccolo on different strains and in the trio purposefully. So when the piccolo comes back in and you get the upper octave, you get that color and that shimmer that what he was so great at putting in there. And of course, many Sousa marches have the obligato, not just Stars and Stripes, but there are many Sousa marches that have either an obligato in the trio or an obligato in the final strain. And it's just piccolo heaven to be able to have these amazing third melodies that come on top of one or two that he's already put in the layer cake. And they're always so creative and so colorful. And so the advice is just to not be shy, but also to keep everything up and sparkling and bright, and not let it get too bogged down or too flat or too sustained on the piccolo parts, because he rarely gives the piccolo more sustained, more lyrical stuff.
That's fascinating. Yeah. And yeah, your flute and piccolo section always sounds amazing. I think when I did the orchestra concert with you, it was Heather and Courtney sounding great, also in Ravel and Mozart, in addition to the Jotian and Piazzolla we did. But when the piccolos come forward to do Stars and Stripes, it is such an exciting moment. And you're absolutely right. Flutists, I'm just going to say this one more time, do practice in the band key. Don't only practice in the orchestra key for that,
Right.
for your excerpt.
Yes, because it's on every piccolo flute audition we have as well in the band key. So
Okay, that is good to know. And while we're doing some nitty gritty stuff, Jason, for wind players, but especially for flutists, I know myself as a flutist. We play with more vibrato than other members of the woodwind section, to sometimes people's chagrin. But no, we can do it extremely tastefully, and the goal, of course, is to having a huge range of vibrato at the service of the music. It's just an expressive tool. But when I play in my life, I tend to play wind quintet sometimes, more than band for sure. And I modulate that. And so I hear often in this great, amazing blend of the marine band, the flutist can't really use soloistic vibratos for a lot of that texture. Is that something people just come in and listen and adjust, or is that part of sort of what is directed at different times?
I think most of the time our professionals come in and they figure it out pretty quickly what you can and can't get away with in a band flute section, because of course the band flute section is about the same size normally, 2, 3, 4 players as a large orchestral section, but they're playing different parts. You're playing violin parts and you're playing music that would have been relegated to other instruments in the orchestra. So they're pretty intuitive, but I love your comment about having a whole toolbox of colors and speeds and width of vibrato that you can employ at different times. I'm actually a proponent of vibrato. I think that there's a real danger in a band of playing a little too flat, and the color without too much vibrato, it's very difficult to get it to be colorful and to get a wider range of colors. Orchestra is just naturally easier because there's more different variety of instruments with different wavelengths, and they can get just different sounds, and there's more stratification of the colors and timbres. So in a band, if the instruments that do play with vibrato, saxophones, euphoniums, trumpets to a degree, flutes, certainly oboe, bassoon, to encourage that and encourage it wherever you can, as long as there is some flexibility in the speed and the width, so that we can make it blend. I even sometimes encourage the clarinet section to play with vibrato, because I think of the clarinet section like the fiddle section, and they would all play with vibrato and they would find a way to make it blend. I think you can do the same thing in certain types of clarinet sections and certain type of music, and it just gives that little shimmer to the sound. And our clarinet section plays so beautifully in tune all the time that if you give them a little license to bring some color into the sound, it just lets it leap off the page a bit.
Oh, I love that. Adding even more nuance. That is great. And certainly from my standpoint, I mean, vibrato does help flutists blend and tune, if it's the right judicial kind. So
when we listen for that in auditions, just as orchestras do, when a flute player comes in, I'm paying very close attention to the vibrato they choose, how they employ it, and what if it's very clear to me the decisions that they're making are thoughtful, even if I wouldn't make the same decision, I'm impressed, because they're really thinking down at that level about the singing quality and the color of the music. And we bring that into our large ensemble wherever we can as well.
wow. Well, this is a perfect segue to view a clip of one of your digital rehearsals.
Okay.
This is a fantastic project that you have where you share with the public the workings of the Marine Band at rehearsal, from the Sousa Band Hall at the Marine Barracks Annex, where I had the great pleasure of rehearsing with you as well. So a kind of special historic site. But sometimes these are even first rehearsals, I think, even if
they're always first rehearsals.
Always? Oh, wow.
So that was part of I'll set it up a little bit. So this was a COVID project, just like you started this series during COVID. We needed to reach out and provide a resource to the educators and students across the nation who are stuck at home. And so right away, we mobilized all of our video teams and our musicians, and we tried to create as much content as we could safely. And as we got a little bit back to work, when it was more safe to come back, we started to do these sessions where they were just open rehearsals. And the rule was that it had to be the first rehearsal of the piece, even if it was a piece that we knew that we were coming back to it for the first time. So there was no pre-rehearsal. So we were coming back, and everything you see was comments that were happening right out of the gate. There are also no edits. So this is just 30 minutes of us working together on whatever comes out of my mouth, whatever comes up in the rehearsal. And it was fascinating because it took my colleagues a little bit of time to get on board, because we weren't going to be perfect. This was going to be a rehearsal. We were going to show people that we're human beings. We started a high level, of course, as professionals, but there's always things to work on. There's always pitch and ensemble and things to decide and negotiate, and then work on the music, to show them how we talk to each other, how we collaborate, how we negotiate, how we bring something to life in the first 30 minutes of our work together.
It's great. I mean, I know as a musician, I learned so much from watching rehearsals as well as, going to my own ones, but it's it's a really great project. This is some of the Percy Grainger Lincolnshire Posies. So I'm going to just present a part. I think I got it to a part where you're playing and speaking. So we're going to just get a sample of that going.
Okay.
Good. Before we get to the coda, we're going to work on a little bit, but did you notice the bass sax? We included the bass sax just for you all. There's a couple of moments in this piece where the lower octave and contrabassoon and bass sax, it's so important. And when you have access to that instrument, it's great to put it in there. Wonderful, everybody. This is just, it's so moving. One of the things that I think can really put some polish on this for us is to, almost like we talked about in the opening quartet, is to make sure that this never gets stuck. The melody actually is just fine, kind of flowing with the pattern of this, but sometimes the white notes, the half notes, the quarter notes can get a little stuck if we over-articulate especially. So you can actually smoothen out some of the articulations unless Grainger specifically puts an accent in there. A good example, for instance, is basses and tubas, low winds, the triplet at the end of measure 71. We don't actually need to over-articulate that. The forte is just enough, wah-dee-da-da, and if we play it a little more sustained, it kind of keeps that flow going for the pickup of the next phrase. We worked out the dee-da-da-da-da, the subsequent ones are beautiful, so we'll get that at the very beginning of 46 as well. Steve, wonderful. Can we go back to your solo? So the character is perfect. If we could just, again, like I encouraged our quartet in the beginning, at the pickup of every phrase, if you could just be forward thinking, that way the motor that's happening in the clarinets doesn't have to change at all. Ideally, the idea here is that I wouldn't conduct this at all. We would just be in this kind of trance that's moving through ja da dee dee da, and the 3/8 bars that happen are really just they're not even a hiccup. They're just a little off-kilter kind of moment. So it's still in this kind of trance phrase. So if I conduct it a little smoother, hopefully that'll encourage us to not change the time at all, but just really, it's like, what just happened? We're on the beat, we're off the beat. That's the feeling we're supposed to get, almost this kind of seasick type of feeling.
And the whole thing is so interesting. Thanks for sharing that.
It's always hard to hear yourself, a year later talking to your colleagues and thinking, oh, what am I talking about there? And, but it is very spontaneous. And so it's a very honest video series, and that's what it was designed to be.
No, it's great. I mean, I think, rehearsal, I think it's such an important part of the journey. It's the journey, and you got to love the journey, whether you're in it or just appreciate it, coming to the concert. There's so much going into it. So I think it's a great series in so many ways. And I have to say, at rehearsal with you, when we were getting ready to premiere Jotian's concerto, something happened that had never happened, because you told me right after you had to check your watch because you had gotten several calls from the White House and the schedule was being changed for an event. I think you were welcoming the Olympic athletes with Marine band players. And so, yeah, that was definitely a first for me, but it's really amazing that you are, there as musical advisor to the president and have sometimes a changing schedule or, exciting events added for dignitaries and that kind of thing.
It actually happens all the time. I mean, the White House is a very fast moving train because it is the center of our government. And the president, of course, is a very important and popular guy. And so events get added and changed and tweaked and canceled all the time. And our job is, our primary mission is to provide music for the president of the United States. And so we focus very deeply on that. And there are often times I'm rehearsing a concert that I put together that we're enjoying, and my phone is ringing off the hook because they need me right then to talk about a change and a mission that's happening at the White House. That's been one of the trickiest parts of my job, is living in all of these different worlds simultaneously and trying to keep my brain in order and keep my conscience clear as I move from thing to thing. But it's very exciting. I mean, how often can somebody say that they make music at the White House on a regular basis? So it's been a thrilling part of this job that I've had for these 25 years.
No, it's super unique and fascinating. And yeah, it's really great. You're sharing some of that with us tonight. And we're getting lots of lovely comments. Dear friends, Bobby and Jay are on, and they were at the premiere concert coming down as well.
Great.
Bobby thought the Brahms piece is beautiful. Absolutely. And then, oh, Rick, thanks. This is possibly his #1 favorite tea with Mimi thus far. That's great. And he's heard all of them.
Yeah, there's been 33, haven't there? This is quite a series you've got.
Thank you so much. So there is so much to talk about or listen to before we wrap up. But you shared many great options in terms of what to play. But the Coleridge-Taylor ballad is very special. I think it was an arrangement that you had made recently for the band.
It did, actually. It was a transcription we had done prior to COVID, or in the middle of COVID, and we never had a chance to premiere it. So it's been on the list for 3 or 4 years, and we finally got to it this past year. And we ended up taking it on our national concert tour as well, and it was really well received. Mm-hmm. Coleridge-Taylor was such a brilliant British composer, turn of the century, died young, but writing incredible music, and really very much in the Romantic tradition. I mean, very much influenced by Brahms and Tchaikovsky and Dvorak, and you can hear about it in this ballade, which was kind of the piece that put him on the map. And orchestras have played it over the years, but it's kind of one of those pieces that you just see pop up once in a while. And when I came across it, I thought, this has to be a band piece. I mean, this just feels tailor-made to enter the band repertoire. And so, yeah, one of the great joys of the Marine Band is we have our own arrangers and composers. And so all I have to do is just make a phone call, and our professionals can turn any orchestral piece into a band piece. And so we often do that. And this was one of those pieces that came out of that project.
Wow. Well, it's very richly textured for band. Absolutely. And yeah, very interesting composer's life as well, being Afro-English and known as the African Mahler in his time, which is unusual. But then having, visited the United States and worked with Paul Laurence Dunbar and kind of feeding into the origins of the Harlem Renaissance is also just really interesting in terms of sort of music and literary connections at the time. I think he also set Hiawatha to music. So he was very interested in literature and poetry. So great intersection of a lot of cultural features.
Mm-hmm.
Let's hear a couple minutes of that.
Great.
Wow, such a beautiful performance. The
Oh,
way you,
thank you.
the sculpted rubatos you were doing, and just so organic with the whole group, and of course, beautiful ensemble and solo playing from the
Thank
band.
you. It's a lot of fun when the band owns a piece and you can just ride that wave as a conductor and just enjoy the moment. And I definitely saw myself having a couple of those moments with my colleagues there.
Mhm. Yeah. Wow. Well, thank you so much for sharing this beautiful music, of your wisdom, and talking about your experiences this evening, Jason. And before we say goodnight, I'd love to know, what are you excited about that's coming up?
Well, we're continuing to celebrate our 225th anniversary, and this year is chock full of some great things. In addition to all of our normal White House performances and special events, we have the great John Williams returning to conduct the Marine Band again for, I think this will be his 6th time with the President's Own. So that'll be a Kennedy Center concert on July 16th, where I will conduct the first half and Maestro will come out and lead the second half, an all concert of all of John Williams' great music. We will be going on another national concert tour in the fall, as we do every year. This year, we're going through the Midwest. So we'll be at Chicago Symphony Center again. We'll be in Hill Auditorium at the University of Michigan, Michigan State, some of the great universities in the West, Midwest. And then in December, we're capping off our year with a performance at the Midwest Band and Orchestra Clinic, which is a huge gathering for those who know of music educators and professionals and performers from all over the country, and we'll be the featured ensemble, which will be a wonderful way to finish out this 225th anniversary year.
Oh, that's so phenomenal. Congratulations.
Thanks.
With all those festivities. Well, I can't wait to see you for our recording in a few weeks. And invite everyone to keep following, of course, the Marine Band, my page, Dolce Suono Ensemble's page, for live events and more live streams and online content. We have some very nice comments. One in Portuguese from Vilma Camaragos. Muito obrigada. From Brazil. Thanks for joining tonight. Y también saludos a mis amigos hispanohablantes. Tengo muchos amigos en Latinoamérica y a veces España que están en los shows, en los programas. Saludos a todos. I always do a Spanish language greeting because we have a lot of friends following from those countries. And Fred, Emery, and Victor Coco, thanks for the thanks and for the nice comments. So Jason, thank you. It was just so much fun talking to you and hearing this music, and I really could go on and on with it.
Such a great joy to see you and talk to you tonight, Mimi, and I'll never miss an opportunity to talk music with you in life and performances. Wonderful.
Can't wait for more. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Good night.
Okay. Good night. Bye.